If you're sick of putting endless time and effort into the gym without seeing the results that you want, stop scrolling and listen closely. What I'm about to share is an opinion, hype, or guesswork. These are principles backed by experience, evidence, and nearly 2 decades of real world application. And if you actually apply them and genuinely take them to heart, they will absolutely change the way that you make progress for the rest of your life. I 100% guarantee it. Now, in this mini series, I'm breaking down training intent. And what I mean by that is understanding your purpose, the outcome that you're actually chasing, and having a clear goal and plan when you walk into the gym so every session aligns with that outcome, which means directing everything you do towards making as much progress as efficiently and effectively as possible towards that goal, even if it means putting more effort into training smarter, being more precise, and doing things that demand more focus, not just training harder. And all of this is rooted in basic biomechanics and physiology. But when you take a step back and truly take time to actually understand it and look at it for what it is, you'll realize it's really not that complicated. It's actually common sense. So over the years, I've been grateful enough to have a lot of in-depth conversations with some very intelligent people about training. And when I step back and look at those conversations as a whole, they all really boil down to the same thing: intent. Not really what people do in the gym, but why they do it, why they choose the weights that they do, why they execute the movements the way they do, and how much thought really goes into each rep, set, and session, and what they're actually trying to accomplish with each movement. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The real difference between the people who make consistent progress and the people who stay stuck is ego versus intent. That realization pushed me to start breaking down patterns. I started to look at training through a broader lens, stripping away trends, preferences, and ego, and focus on only the things that I know for a fact to be true when it comes to hypertrophy. And over time, those patterns became very clear. And that's what led me to create this mini series, to share the principles that actually drive progress for people who genuinely want to reach their physique goals and are humble enough to take a step back, challenge what they think they know, and apply something new. Now, in this series, I'm going to be talking specifically about hypertrophy training, but this right here, this applies to any goal. At the most basic level, if a certain way of training produces a better outcome and you avoid it simply because it doesn't look as cool or it doesn't stroke your ego, you are actively holding yourself back. Consistency is a given, showing up is a given, training hard is a given. But if what you do in the gym and your overall approach isn't aligned with your goal, then you're not maximizing your progress. And that's a choice. So because there's so much information here, I'm gonna be breaking this down into multiple clips because there's too much to fit into one video. But each part will build on the last. And my goal with this is simple: to help you understand the principles behind intentional hypertrophy training so you can make the most out of every session when you walk into the gym. Because at the end of the day, this is about understanding what you need to do, not what you want to do in order to attain your goal. It's not about lifting more weight. It's about self-awareness and understanding what your true intent is, and about recognizing when your ego is getting in the way of your results. All right. So when people sign up for the gym, they typically do this with a goal in mind, right? Whether it's changing their physique, building strength, or improving performance. But what honestly and genuinely confuses me is how many people don't actually line up what they do in the gym with a goal that they say that they have. And I'm not even talking about the people that are sitting around chatting or scrolling on their phones. That's a whole other conversation. I'm talking about the ones who are actually serious about what they're doing in the gym and working towards a goal, but they're not maximizing everything they could be in order to make as much progress as possible towards that goal. Now, typically, whatever time you have in the gym for that day is fixed because you have other responsibilities and parts of your day that you need to attend to. So you already know exactly how much time that you've got. The only remaining variable is what you do with that time. You can either maximize your efforts so it matches your intention towards that goal, or you can choose not to put your effort forward and end up with subpar results. And when I say maximize your efforts, I'm not talking about training intensity, because you can train hard physically, but that doesn't mean you're putting in all your effort when it comes to doing the thing that you can do, which may include the things that you don't want to do in order to maximize your progress. And when it comes to hypertrophy training specifically, we're talking about things that maximize mechanical tension. This includes things like using an appropriate load for the muscle you're trying to target, having the muscle you're intending to work on control the weight with meaningful tension, training through a full range of motion, minimizing leverage and momentum, and using good form and technique. Understand, maximizing these variables is what maximizes mechanical tension, or as I like to call it, meaningful tension, which again is the main driver of hypertrophy. And honestly, if you think about it at the most basic level, to say the thing that makes muscle growth occur the most is doing things that place the most tension to that muscle you're actually trying to grow, meaning the more intense you are about doing things that make that specific muscle that you're intending to grow do the work, without relying on assisting muscles or leveraging momentum, the more growth you're going to get over time. And if you think about the logic behind it, it just makes sense. And if it makes sense through that basic lens, the next question is, then why don't more people train that way? Why aren't more people controlling the eccentrics, using full range of motion, not relying on momentum and leverage, focusing on good form and technique, and not just throwing heavy weights around? Well, with a lot of thought, I've boiled this down to three categories. First, people who don't actually want their goals as bad as they say they do. They like the idea of the result, the physique and the strength and development, but they don't want the process required to achieve it. They simply just don't want to do the work. They don't want to get comfortable being uncomfortable, and they don't want to patiently grind through the mundane consistency that it takes to achieve your goals. In other words, they want the reward, but not the lifestyle that produces it. Second, people who are naive to proper training concepts. These lifters who show up, do the exercises, and maybe even train hard, but they don't actually know or understand basic training principles. So they come and they work out, but they don't understand they could be getting so much more out of their time. They're consistent, just not intentional. Third, and this is by far the biggest category, and this is people who are too stubborn and ego-driven to change. These are the lifters who claim they want a goal, but when it's not doing something that they know or have done in the past, they instantly resist it and brush it off because their egos do not allow them to have an open mind and absorb information that might be beneficial to them, especially when that information means slowing down the reps, using a full range of motion, not using momentum and leverage, not depending so much on synergistic muscles and stabilizers, and exposing their poor mechanics and weaknesses. Because this means they have to do two things. One, confront the fact they've been doing it wrong. And two, and this is the hardest one, drop the weight. Because once they use an appropriate load, it becomes blatantly obvious. They were never truly training the muscle. They were always training the movement. And the movements were being carried by synergy, leverage, and position, not intention. And that self-realization is the beginning of maturity. Because a huge part of maturing as a lifter is learning to step outside of your ego and ask yourself honestly, what is the best way to accomplish the goal that I say that I have? Because the more intentional your training becomes, the less room there is for your ego to hide. And the people who resist at the hardest are always the ones who stay making subpar progress year after year. Now, if you're the first type of person, I can't really help you because I can't make someone do the work. But if you're the second or third type of person, then listen up because the information you're about to hear is going to be extremely valuable to you. That is as long as you can listen without ego. Now, I broke this down into 5 parts. Part 1, momentum and leverage. Part 2, synergistic takeover. Part 3, range of motion restriction. Part 4, eccentric control and meaningful tension. And part 5, logging your lifts. First, let's go over momentum and leverage. So momentum doesn't help hypertrophy because it reduces the amount of time the target muscle is actively producing force. Carrying speed from one part of the rep into the next shortens the most demanding portion of the movement, which reduces how long the muscle actually stays under tension. And when you're using momentum to bounce at the bottom of a rep, you're also relying on the stretch reflex to initiate the lift. That stretch reflex stores elastic energy in the tendons and connective tissue to help reverse the movement, but it reduces the amount of force that the muscle itself has to generate. Now, leverage isn't conducive to hypertrophy because it allows you to complete the rep with less muscular effort. When you change joint angles or body positioning to create better leverage, you're basically making the movement mechanically easier, especially at the exact point where tension should be at its highest. So instead of the target muscle having to produce force for the hard part, the structure of the position does more of the work. And that might help you move more weight, but it also means less meaningful mechanical tension in the muscle you're trying to grow. Now let's go over synergistic takeover. This is where the body starts redistributing work away from the muscle you're trying to train and enter other muscles whose job it is to help complete the movement. This happens when the load, positioning, or fatigue level exceeds what the target muscle can control on its own, often because the ego drives load selection beyond what the muscle can actually manage. And then at that point, the nervous system doesn't care about isolating a muscle. It cares about getting the rep done. So it begins recruiting other muscles to assist, stabilize, and compensate, even if that means the target muscle is no longer the one doing majority of the work. So the rep still happens, the weight still moves, but the stimulus shifts. And once that happens, you're no longer training the target muscle, you're training the movement. And the crazy part is, you can use perfect form control and range of motion and still shift tension away from the target muscle simply because the load that you're using is too heavy for the muscle that you're trying to bias. Now, the load may not be too heavy to move from point A to point B with good mechanics, but it is too heavy for the muscle you're trying to target to be the prime mover during the entire lift. And this is where most lifters get confused because they want to train like powerlifters, but they want the results of bodybuilders. They assume if I'm moving more weight, the muscle I'm working should be getting more work. But that's not how hypertrophy works. As load increases, the nervous system has to protect you. Heavier the weight requires more stability, more bracing, and more total force production. And your nervous system will always prioritize completing the task over biasing a muscle. So inevitably, the heavier the load gets, the more synergistic muscles jump in, the more stabilizers take over, the more joint and connective tissue stress that you get, the more systemic fatigue you get, the more central nervous system fatigue that you get. And for all of that, the trade-off is going to be less tension ending up in the muscle that you're actually trying to grow. Understand, you can have perfect mechanics, but once that load crosses a certain threshold, that movement stops being a muscle specific exercise and turns into a full body exercise. And that's why load selection is its own principle. Because again, you can train a movement or you can train a muscle. A great example of this would be the hack squat, one of the most poorly executed movements in the gym. Now, let's just say your goal is quad growth and you have two sets. One set is closer to your 10 RM, meaning by rep 10, you don't really have another rep left. And the other set is closer to your 15 RM. Even though the 10 RM set is heavier, the 15 RM set will almost always create more direct quad stimulus. And here's why. As load increases, systemic demand increases. Your body starts recruiting more muscles to help stabilize the movement and produce force. In a hack squat, that usually means more work gets shifted into your glutes and hip flexors, your adductors, especially out of the bottom, your core and bracing musculature, and even your upper body, especially if you're pushing through the handles. Now, as the weight gets heavier, more and more effort shifts into everything else, and the quads start losing tension to the rest of the system. Now, you can control the tempo with both weights, but one provides the quads with a better stimulus than the other. At the 15 RM, the quads can own the eccentric with minimal assistance from other muscles, and with less joint connective tissue stress, which provides a better overall stimulus. And with the 10 RM set, the nervous system will inevitably compensate more, pulling in greater assistance from other muscles just to manage the load, which takes away from the stimulus. Same tempo, same machine, completely different stimulus. And this is where people get confused. They think if I can hack squat more weight with the same tempo, that must mean more tension. But it doesn't, because tempo doesn't determine stimulus. Intentional tension distribution does. Remember, if your nervous system is distributing the load more just to produce the same quality rep with more weight, your quads are no longer the limiting factor. And when the quads stop being the limiting factor in prime mover, quad growth stops being the outcome. And that's why heavier doesn't always mean more effective. Sometimes heavier simply means more compensation, more systemic fatigue, more leverage, more momentum, more joint connective tissue stress, and less direct quad tension. So understand, heavier loads do increase total force requirements, but they also increase the cost of producing that force, which can reduce how much it stays in the target muscle. But let me be clear, there is no single end-all be-all rep range for hypertrophy. If you personally feel a 10 RM set gives you a better quad stimulus than a 15 RM set, that's fine. There's no right or wrong here. The reason I'm addressing this is because it's a literal fact. The closer you get to your 1 rep max, meaning the heavier the weight gets for you, the more all these things we just talked about have to come into play. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The higher the systemic demand, the more assistance from assisting muscles, and the more tension that's going to be distributed away from the target muscle. So what matters here is choosing the rep range where you can be the most consistent at keeping tension in the target muscle that you're trying to grow. And that's why it's so important to be able to drop your ego and be real with yourself about what you're trying to accomplish with the load that you're intending to move. Now let's talk about load-induced range of motion restriction. So believe it or not, you're not the only one controlling your range of motion. Your nervous system has some say in it as well. If load, speed, or stability exceeds what your body can safely control, your nervous system will restrict your range of motion to protect you, even if you're trying to force it. But here's the key distinction. The nervous system is the mechanism, the ego is the cause. Your nervous system restricts range of motion in response to a perceived threat. Your ego creates that threat by choosing a load that the muscle can't control through a full range of motion simply to move a heavier weight from A to B. So when ego drives load selection, it puts your body in a position where restriction is inevitable. Either way, the outcome is going to be the same. Shortened range of motion, tight stabilizers, tension shifting to joints and connective tissues, and the target muscle loses the stimulus. This isn't a technique issue. This isn't a discipline issue. This is either your body protecting you from a load it can't control, or your ego forcing your body into protection mode in the first place. And once your system perceives a deep lengthened position as a threat, you're not going to be able to just push into that range of motion. Your body's too smart. It's going to protect you, no matter how strong you are or how hard you try to force it. A perfect example of this would be a flat dumbbell press. Now let's say 60-pound dumbbells are an appropriate load for you for training your pecs. Not your shoulders, triceps, and pecs, your pecs. With that weight, you can control the eccentric, pause at the bottom, open up your chest, and sink into a deep stretch with good form. Now let's compare that to grabbing the 120. The moment you pick them up, your nervous system is already responding by how much heavier the load is. You can immediately feel it and how much stabilization is required just to hold on to the weight. And once you lie back and kick the dumbbells up, even more muscles start assisting. Shoulders, forearms, triceps, not to press the weight, but just to keep it under control. And then as you start to descend, it becomes blatantly obvious. You're not going to make it all the way down. You're not going to make it halfway down. You're not even going to touch your chest. And you definitely can't sink into that deep stretch in the bottom like you did with the 60s. Your body simply won't allow it. Why? Because entering a deep lengthened position under a load that you cannot control is perceived as a threat. So your body responds by shortening your range of motion, tightening stabilizers, shifting tension to areas like the shoulders and the triceps, And this prevents the pecs from being the prime mover and allows the other muscles to take over. But when you use the 60s, which was an appropriate load, the opposite happened. You could open up your chest and expand into that deep stretch and really sink into that deep lengthened position. You can sit there and pause in that opening without collapsing, and you can keep the tension exactly where you want it, in your pecs. And those 60-pound dumbbells might be lighter weight, but they're the load that actually works the muscle you're trying to target without the synergistic compensations and allows you to train in the fully lengthened position where the greatest hypertrophic response lies. So it's your job to choose the weight that allows the muscle you're trying to work, not panic, not stabilizers, not synergistic muscles, to actually do the movement, because that is how you're going to get the best growth. Now let's go over the most overlooked aspects of hypertrophy training, controlling the eccentric. Now, the eccentric phase is crucial for hypertrophy because it directly increases mechanical tension, which again is the primary driver of muscle growth. When you control your eccentric, a few things happen. First, it allows the muscle to resist the highest external forces, meaning your muscles have to fight gravity the entire time to slow it down. It also helps maintain mechanical tension on the target muscle by requiring the muscle itself to control the resistance rather than relying on momentum or elastic rebound. And it ensures that the resistance can be actively and safely loaded in the lengthened position, meaning the muscle itself is responsible for absorbing and controlling the load rather than relying on elastic rebound or the stretch reflex. Now, when eccentrics are controlled properly, they increase mechanical tension, meaning they increase the total force experienced by the muscle fibers. They also improve where that mechanical tension is expressed and absorbed, which increases how much accuracy is actually placed on the target muscle. And they allow for better control through the hardest portion of the range of motion, meaning they improve the ability to apply and maintain tension where the leverage is at its worst or where torque demand is at its highest. And when eccentrics controlled properly, you don't just increase stimulus, you also reduce unnecessary stress. You get less joint connective tissue strain, you get less systemic fatigue, and less nervous system and central nervous system stress, which allows for longer, healthier, and more growth promoting training phases. Because more of the load is actually handled by the muscles themselves instead of being dumped to joints, connective tissues, or the nervous system. So when you look at all these benefits together as a whole, and remember that mechanical tension is the primary driver of hypertrophy, it becomes clear that controlling the eccentric is one of the most effective tools we have for increasing stimulus. So with that being said, when you look at eccentrics through the lens of mechanical tension and hypertrophy, they're not really controversial at all. The only time eccentrics can become even a little bit controversial is when people confuse eccentric control with using a load that's so light that it fails to create enough meaningful mechanical tension. Because you can have perfect form, full range of motion, in a slow, beautiful negative and still fail to create a hypertrophic stimulus. And this is why load matters. Because eccentric control only matters when the load is heavy enough for the targeted muscle to actually be challenged. If the load is too light, the eccentric becomes nothing more than a slow, easy descent, meaning no meaningful mechanical tension, no reason for the muscle to adapt. That's why the same principle that punishes you for going too heavy also punishes you for going too light. Too heavy leads to compensation and tension leakage. Too light leads to insufficient mechanical tension. Only in the middle is where you see growth. Remember, not controlling a movement at all or control without sufficient load isn't stimulus. It's just movement. So with all this information that's already out there and in people's faces, the real question becomes, so why do so many people resist the eccentric? I'll tell you why. Because it does not look impressive and it doesn't hide poor load selection or mechanics. It simply forces the muscle to do more work with less weight. And anything that exposes ego-driven training or anything that calls for less weight and more intention is usually the exact thing that people resist the hardest. And last but not least, who would I be if I didn't talk about logging lifts? Now, if you're not tracking what you did last session, then you're not truly progressing, you're just guessing. Let me tell you why logging your lifts truly matters. It turns intent into measurable progress, and it removes guesswork from progressive overload. It shows you exactly what worked, not just what fell hard. And it keeps your effort honest so you have a standard to hold yourself to. Now, here's what to log as a minimum. How much weight you're using, how many reps you're doing, and if you're using an NBS Training Systems app, if you maintain tension in the target muscle so it can automatically make your adjustments for next week, and training notes for your future sessions. And guys, trust me, that's what separates good logbooks from great ones. Actually being intentional about the notes that you're writing. I cannot tell you the amount of times that I've wrote notes in my training, and the next session when I went to go do the movement, if those notes weren't there, the movement just wouldn't have felt right because I found something to make it better. And I wrote that in my notes. If they weren't there, I would just go every session without really truly knowing what I changed last time to make it feel better. Also, writing things in, like understanding why the set ended, like maybe a muscle that you're working wasn't the limiting factor like you meant it to be, that's huge to write in there because that's what allows you to make adjustments before your next session. Logging your lifts also helps you know when to deload. If your lifts stop progressing and your internal feedback is telling you that you're beat up, the data confirms it. This is training intelligently because deloads are earned through accumulating fatigue and identified through patterns in your logbook. Because progressive overload isn't just adding weight or reps. It's about improving execution, tension, recovery, and intent, session to session. So make sure you're training with intent and logging your lifts. At the end of the day, all these principles come back to one simple truth. Hypertrophy isn't about doing movements, it's about challenging muscles. And the second you start training that way, with real intent, real awareness, and real ownership, everything changes. Your load selection changes, your execution changes, your tempo changes, your range of motion changes, and because of that, your results finally start to change as well. Applying these principles forces people to drop the weight, and that's where the ego check hits. They realize even though they might have been performing a movement correctly, they never truly understood how to prioritize that muscle they're actually trying to grow. And once the load's appropriate, it becomes blatantly obvious on how much they were relying on synergistic muscles, leverage and momentum, and short range motion instead of putting tension where it truly belonged. Because a huge part of maturing as a lifter is learning to drop your ego and look at every exercise through the lens of, what is the best way to accomplish the goal that I say that I have? Because the more intentional you become, the more ego you're forced to let go of. And the people who resist at the hardest are always the ones who stay stuck in the same place year after year. So if your goal is hypertrophy, your intention must be to place as much meaningful tension as possible on the muscle you're trying to grow. This means choosing the appropriate load for the muscle you're trying to target, having meaningful tension by controlling your reps, using a full range of motion to recruit as many muscle fibers as possible, minimizing unnecessary help from other muscles, joints, connective tissues, and focusing on keeping tension exactly where you want it. Now, maximizing these principles might not look cool, but cool doesn't build muscle. Intent does, consistency does, and meaningful tension does. So remember, when your intent changes, your execution changes. And when your execution changes, your stimulus changes. And when your stimulus changes, your physique finally changes. So train with intent. Every rep, every set, every session.